The CRV would be the reason that the automotive market no longer has the affordable sports coupe or the manual transmission. During the 90s, in the early days, if you had an SUV, you either had a normal SUV or an SUV with luxury features. You didn't really have any different distinctions. And if you had a car, you had a normal car, and then you had a fast car. There was nothing in between the two. Even though the Honda sales reps were so desperately trying to say that this was something new, journalists at the time were trying to place it into a category. And I found when I watched the original reviews of the CRVs, when the interviewers would talk to the representatives from Honda, it sounded quite a bit like a Jordan Peterson interview I watched recently. So what you're saying is it's a 4x4. But of course, it's a 4x4. It's a boxy SUV, it's got ground clearance, it's four-wheel drive, we figured it out. But it wasn't a four-wheel drive. It's all-wheel drive, it's real-time all-wheel drive. There's no transfer case. It only ever sent power to the front wheels unless the rear wheels slipped. We were taking this rock crawling. So what you're saying is it's a car. Of course it's a car. Under here, four-wheel independent double wishbone suspension. If you peel the body away, it's basically an Acura Integra. Of course it's a car. But you can't remove the body. It's stuck there. So it's gonna be tall, it's gonna be high riding, and with the 2-liter low compression non-VTEC 4-cylinder making 126 horsepower, no, it's not a sports car. It can't be. That's too slow. So what you're saying is it didn't have a classification. Honda called it a comfortable runabout vehicle. Some people called it a mini SUV, but it didn't really have a home today. It's crossover, of course, but not in the 90s. So the reviewers might not have known what to do with the CRV. It was a bit out of place and they didn't really know how to classify it. But maybe the public knew what to do with it. The public knew exactly what to do with these things. Buy them. 500,000 RD1 CRVs got sold in the States alone. They didn't care that it understeered at the first sight of a corner. They weren't going autocrossing with it. They weren't cross-shopping in Integra. They were cross-shopping in Accord. And they weren't worried that it wasn't going to climb the Whipsaw Trail. They wanted to go skiing in the winter. It was just a vehicle that did everything-ish. And it was perfect for the average consumer. So what does this have to do with a sports coupe, manual transmission, and the affordable car? Well, before the CRV came to exist, if you went into a dealership, there were 3 distinct places. You'd go over to the 4-wheel drive corner, where they were going to sell you something expensive, heavy, bad on gas, with a 16-page instruction manual and 19 warning labels on how to not turn the transfer case into metal confetti. That kind of sounds unpleasant, and for your first car in your mid-20s, you realistically weren't going to buy yourself one of those. So you were left with a sedan, boring, dad as a sedan, or the coupe. So a lot of young people who really didn't have any need for more than 2 doors would buy the fun car. They buy the coupe, they buy the one that makes them stand out, not look practical. When the CRV came around, it really didn't make sense not to get this. The only reason you get a car is if you're a driver, if you're someone who wants to be behind the wheel of something low to the ground and zippy. For the most majority of people, they aren't. It pulled sales from the outlier cars. It pulled sales from the regular cars. People buying 4x4s bought CRVs, people buying Accords bought CRVs, and people buying Civic Coupes bought CRVs because it worked for everyone. Why does this make a difference nowadays? Well, because the engineering and the development going into the Accord isn't also going into the Accord Coupe. It's going into the HRV and the Passport and the CRV, and it's going into the Pilot because that's where the money is. More people got the SUVs, more people got crossovers. And that sucks for the first few years because for so long, manufacturers could slap all-wheel drive on the back of any hunk of garbage and it would sell. The CRV is not fun to drive. The RD1 CRV, floppy thing. It's not fun to drive. It's fine, but it's not fun to drive. So when they offered it with stick shift, of course no one took it. They have such a low success or take rate of stick shift CRVs. They're hard to find now, and I wanted one more than this automatic one. but nobody bought it because they didn't make it handle well, and nobody was trying to make their crossover handle well. So you might be wondering why I'm telling this story 23 years later. And for that, I'm going to need another car. Now, this isn't a Honda, and I realize that, but I don't have access to a Honda, but my point isn't really brand specific. It's to most new small crossovers. And what I like about them is they've gotten better. The Honda CRV I don't want to fault as being a not fun vehicle to drive because at the time it didn't need to be. It was designed to be more practical than the car you could otherwise be buying. But now that every single manufacturer makes 100 different crossovers in 96,000 different colors, competitions come in. Now that the market force is driving the engineers to be the ones working on the cars, the same engineers who might have been working on the SRT4 or the Mazda Speeds, now that those engineers and the money behind them is working on all the crossovers, they've realized that they have the technology to put brand identity back into these little cars. And so even though it's a small crossover, the Mazdas have gotten their zoom back, and the Hondas have gotten their zip back, and the Toyotas, well, their cars were boring in the early 2000s, and their cars are boring now, and their SUVs have kind of stayed boring the whole time, so good job for consistency. The cars that are fun have gotten fun again across the range. And you've started to realize that brand identity has come back into these vehicles that for the longest time, like you wouldn't believe that the engineer who designed the suspension in this CX-3 was the same one who did the suspension in the Tribute. They are completely different driving vehicles. And it's more fun to be in this one because someone who was working on it liked driving. And why is that important? I mean, I even said earlier in my video that people who are buying these don't really care about driving, and that's still the case. But it doesn't take a food critic to know the difference between a frozen pizza and a restaurant pizza in the same way that it doesn't take a driving enthusiast to notice when a car is kind of a dog. And so these new ones with peppy engines and engaging CVTs or engaging shift modes, these cars could possibly bring, even if it was one person who was driving this little Mazda one day, who put it into sport mode and tried to shift it for the first time manually and went, oh, driving's actually kind of fun. If we can bring two people into this small community of car lovers, us weirdos who just love pistons, I mean, with the changes that are coming to the world, isn't it a good thing that even the most normal cars being bought out of practicality are a little bit more fun to drive? The Honda CRV, when it came into the market, basically spelled the end for the small, affordable car to be fun to drive. And realistically, they didn't put too much effort into making them be entertaining. But now that the market segment has moved entirely to be crossovers, the engineers that got to work on the SRT4 and the Mazda Speeds have now become working on the cars that are selling the best. Maybe with electrification coming, that every car is going to weigh 9,000 pounds, the last chance for the fun piston-powered everyday car to be a bit of fun to drive is in the segment that killed the one in the first place. So I'm excited to see what happens before the electrification comes. Maybe the new Mazda 323 GTX replacement will be a CX-3 with a big turbo. Thank you very much for watching 200 Degrees. We'll see you next time.
Losing track of time, losing track of myself.